The relentless Nevada sun beat down on Josie O'Malley's sunken cheeks as she hunched behind the rusty nail saloon, her once fine dress now little more than tattered rags hanging from her substantial frame. Her trembling fingers sifted through discarded food scraps in the refuse pile, the gnawing hunger in her belly overcoming any remaining sense of dignity she might have possessed. Eldorado Canyon, Nevada in 1878 was no place for the weak or unfortunate. The mining boom had brought wealth to some and misery to many others. Josie had arrived 6 months prior with dreams and determination, only to find herself destitute after a series of cruel misfortunes. Her fingers closed around a half-eaten biscuit, and she quickly wiped it against her dress before bringing it to her lips. The sound of boots crunching on gravel made her freeze, caught in the humiliating act of scavenging like a stray dog. "Madam." The voice was deep, tinged with a southern drawl that reminded her of home. Josie didn't look up, couldn't bear to see pity or disgust in a stranger's eyes. She clutched the biscuit tighter, afraid it might be taken from her. "Madam, I don't mean to intrude, but—" The man's shadow fell across her, blocking the harsh sunlight. Finally, Josie raised her eyes. Standing before her was a tall man with broad shoulders, the brim of his Stetson pulled low over his eyes. His clothes were dusty from the trail but of good quality. A cowboy by the look of him, and not one down on his luck. "My name's Clayton Evans," he said, extending a hand, then thinking better of it when he saw her clutch the food closer. "I'd like to help if you'd let me." Josie's throat tightened. "I don't need charity," she managed to say, though her voice cracked from disuse. Clayton crouched down, keeping a respectful distance. "It ain't charity to feed a hungry person, it's just being human." His eyes were kind beneath the brim of his hat. "Would you let me buy you a proper meal inside?" The thought of walking into the saloon, of having all those eyes on her unwashed body and ragged clothes, made Josie shrink back. "I can't go in there," she whispered. "Not looking like this. They wouldn't let me through the door." Clayton stood up and glanced toward the saloon's back entrance. "Wait here," he said, his voice gentle but firm. He disappeared around the corner, leaving Josie wondering if she'd imagined the entire interaction. 5 minutes later, he returned with a blanket. "For your dignity," he said, offering it to her. "You can wrap yourself in this. I know the owner, Tom Phillips. He's a good man. Won't turn away anyone I bring in." Josie hesitated, then reached for the blanket with trembling hands. It was clean and smelled faintly of cedar. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, suspicious of kindness after months of cruelty. "Because I've been hungry before," Clayton said simply. "And nobody should have to eat from a garbage pile." With his help, Josie struggled to her feet, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. She was acutely aware of how her size made the simple act of standing difficult, how her breath came in short gasps from the effort. But Clayton didn't rush her, didn't show any sign of impatience or disgust. They entered through the back door, avoiding the main room filled with miners and cowboys. Clayton led her to a small private dining area separated from the main saloon by a worn curtain. He helped her into a chair that creaked under her weight. A balding man with an apron appeared, giving Josie a quick, surprised glance before turning to Clayton with raised eyebrows. "Tom, I'd like 2 of your best steaks," Clayton said, "with all the fixings, and a pot of coffee." "Sure thing, Clay," Tom replied, his eyes still flicking curiously toward Josie. When Tom left, Josie clutched the blanket tighter around herself. "I can't pay you back," she said, her voice small in the quiet room. "I'm not asking you to," Clayton replied. He removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair with touches of gray at the temples. His face was weathered from years under the sun, with laugh lines around his eyes suggesting he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. His expression was serious, concerned. "My name is Josie O'Malley," she offered, feeling she owed him at least that much. "Miss O'Malley," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "How long have you been in Eldorado Canyon?" "6 months," she replied, then hesitated before adding, "I came with my brother. He died in a mining accident 3 months ago." Clayton's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. This town can be hard on newcomers." "It wasn't always like this," Josie said, gesturing vaguely at herself. "I wasn't always." Her voice trailed off. "Life has a way of changing us," Clayton said, "for better or worse." Tom returned with 2 plates heaped with steaming food, thick steaks, potatoes, and beans. The smell made Josie's stomach clench painfully. She hadn't seen this much food in months. "Eat slow," Clayton advised as Tom set the plates down. "Your stomach won't be used to it." Josie nodded, picking up her fork with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. She cut a small piece of steak, bringing it to her mouth with as much dignity as she could muster. The flavor exploded on her tongue, rich, savory, almost overwhelming after so long without proper food. Clayton ate quietly, giving her space and privacy by not staring as she devoured her meal. When she'd eaten about half, her stomach protested, unaccustomed to such richness. "I can't finish it," she said apologetically. "That's all right," Clayton replied. "Tom can wrap it up for you to take with you." He paused, then asked gently, "Do you have somewhere to go after this?" Josie lowered her eyes. "I've been sleeping in an abandoned shack near the edge of town." Clayton nodded, considering this information. "There's a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Peterson. She's a good woman. I could speak to her about a room for you." "I have no money," Josie reminded him, shame coloring her cheeks. "She sometimes lets rooms in exchange for help with cooking and cleaning," Clayton said. "Would you be willing to work?" "Yes," Josie said quickly. "I'm a good cook, or I was before." She gestured at herself again, at the body that had changed so dramatically during these months of poverty and grief. "Good," Clayton said with a nod. "Finish what you can and we'll go see her." As they left the saloon, Josie felt the stares of the patrons, heard the whispers. Clayton walked beside her, his presence somehow making the scrutiny more bearable. The blanket wrapped around her shoulders felt like thin protection against the world's judgment, but it was more than she'd had before. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure at the respectable end of town, its white paint peeling but its windows clean and curtained. Mrs. Peterson turned out to be a thin, stern-looking woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, but her eyes were kind when Clayton explained Josie's situation. "I can always use help in the kitchen," Mrs. Peterson said after looking Josie over. "And there's a small room at the back that's available." She named a modest sum that would be deducted from Josie's wages for board. "Thank you," Josie said, tears threatening to spill. "I won't let you down." "See that you don't," Mrs. Peterson replied, but there was no unkindness in her tone. "Clayton, you're a good man to help this girl. Not many would." Clayton just nodded, uncomfortable with the praise. "I'll leave you in Mrs. Peterson's capable hands, Miss O'Malley. Perhaps I'll stop by in a few days to see how you're settling in." As he turned to leave, Josie called after him. "Mr. Evans, thank you. I won't forget this." He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, then was gone, leaving Josie standing in the boarding house entryway with her meager bundle of leftover food and the borrowed blanket, facing the first real chance she'd had in months. That night, in a clean nightgown borrowed from Mrs. Peterson and lying on a real bed with clean sheets, Josie let herself cry for the first time since her brother's death. They were tears of relief, of grief, and of something that felt dangerously like hope. True to his word, Clayton Evans returned to the boarding house 3 days later. Josie had spent those days helping in the kitchen, bathing regularly, and wearing borrowed clothes from Mrs. Peterson until her own could be washed and mended. The regular meals had already begun to restore some color to her cheeks, though her body remained as large as before. She was kneading dough for the evening's bread when Mrs. Peterson came into the kitchen. "That cowboy is here to see you," she said with a meaningful look. "I've put him in the parlor." Josie wiped flour from her hands, suddenly nervous. "How do I look?" she asked. Mrs. Peterson's face softened. "Much better than when he brought you here. Go on, don't keep him waiting." Clayton stood when she entered the parlor, removing his hat. "Miss O'Malley," he said with a nod. "You're looking well." "Thank you, Mr. Evans," she replied, self-consciously smoothing the borrowed dress that strained across her substantial frame. "Mrs. Peterson has been very kind. I'm glad to hear it." He gestured to the chair across from him. "May I have a few minutes of your time?" They sat, Josie perching on the edge of her seat. "I wanted to thank you again," she said. "For what you did. Most people wouldn't have. Well, they wouldn't have seen me at all." "I've been thinking about your situation," Clayton said, turning his hat in his hands. "Mrs. Peterson tells me you're a good cook." "I like to think so," Josie replied. "My mother taught me, before she passed." Clayton nodded. "I have a proposition for you, Miss O'Malley. I own a small ranch about 10 miles outside of town. Nothing fancy, but it's mine, free and clear. The problem is, I'm a terrible cook." His mouth quirked up in a self-deprecating smile. "Been living on beans and bacon for longer than I care to admit." Josie's heart began to beat faster. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Evans?" "I am. Room and board plus wages. It's not much, but it's honest work. You'd have your own cabin. It's small, but it's private. Used to be the former owner's mother's place." I don't know what to say," Josie stammered. The offer seemed too good to be true. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Clayton's eyes met hers directly. "I'm a decent judge of character, Miss O'Malley. You've had bad luck, not a bad heart, and frankly, I could use the help." He hesitated, then added, "I should mention that it's just me at the ranch. No other hands at the moment, though I hire seasonal help when needed. I understand if that makes you uncomfortable." The implication was clear. A single woman and a single man living on an isolated ranch would be cause for gossip. Josie considered this. "Would I be able to come into town occasionally? For church and supplies?" "Of course," Clayton nodded. "I make the trip weekly myself." Josie thought of the alternative, staying at the boarding house, working for meager wages, always under Mrs. Peterson's watchful eye. The chance to have her own space, to cook in a proper kitchen, to rebuild her life away from the stares and whispers of townspeople who had seen her at her lowest. It was tempting. "I accept," she said finally. "When would you want me to start?" "I can come for you tomorrow if that suits," Clayton replied, looking pleased. "Give you time to thank Mrs. Peterson properly." Mrs. Peterson was surprisingly supportive when Josie told her about the offer. "Clayton Evans is one of the few honest men in this territory," she said. "Never heard a bad word about him. Mind you," she added with a pointed look, "you should still be careful. Men have needs, and out there's no one to hear you if you need help." "I'll be careful," Josie promised. "But I don't think Mr. Evans is that sort of man." "No," Mrs. Peterson agreed after a moment. "I don't think he is either." The next morning, Clayton arrived with a wagon. Josie's possessions fit into a single carpet bag: her mended clothes, a hairbrush borrowed from Mrs. Peterson, and the blanket Clayton had given her, which she insisted on returning. "Keep it," he said when she tried to hand it to him. "Consider it part of your new bedding." The journey to the ranch took most of the morning. Josie sat beside Clayton on the wagon seat, watching as Eldorado Canyon disappeared behind them and the landscape opened up into rolling hills dotted with sagebrush and juniper. They didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Clayton's small ranch, as he had described it, turned out to be a modest but well-maintained property with a main house, several outbuildings, a barn, and a small cabin set about 50 yards from the main house. A stream ran along one edge of the property, and beyond it, cattle grazed on the open range. "It's beautiful," Josie said honestly as Clayton helped her down from the wagon. "It's home," he replied simply, but she could hear the pride in his voice. The cabin that would be hers was indeed small, just one room with a bed, a trunk, a small table with 2 chairs, and a pot-bellied stove, but it was clean and solid, with curtains at the windows and a colorful quilt on the bed. "I had a neighbor lady come by and fix it up a bit," Clayton explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "Thought you might appreciate a woman's touch." Josie walked around the small space, touching the quilt, looking out the window at the view of distant mountains. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. After sleeping on the hard ground and in the corner of a shack, this little cabin seemed like a palace. "The main house has the kitchen," Clayton said. "I thought you might want to get settled in before seeing it. Take your time. Come up when you're ready, and I'll show you around the rest of the place." Left alone in her new home, Josie sat on the edge of the bed, overcome by emotion. Just a week ago, she had been digging through garbage for food, certain she would die soon, forgotten and alone. Now she had a job, a place to live, and something she hadn't expected to find again: dignity. She unpacked her few belongings, washed her face in the basin of water Clayton had provided, and straightened her hair as best she could. Then, taking a deep breath, she walked up the path to the main house to begin her new life. The kitchen in Clayton's house was larger than Josie had expected, with a good stove, ample cupboards, and a pantry stocked with basic provisions. It was clean but Spartan, clearly the domain of a man who saw cooking as a necessity rather than a pleasure. "I usually eat at this table here," Clayton said, indicating a sturdy wooden table in the kitchen, "unless I have company, which isn't often. You're welcome to eat with me or take your meals in your cabin if you prefer." "I'll eat with you," Josie said. "If that's all right. It's nice to have company while eating." Clayton nodded, looking pleased. "I agree." He showed her the rest of the house, a comfortable sitting room with bookshelves, his bedroom and a spare room upstairs, and a small study where he kept the ranch accounts. It was a bachelor's home, functional rather than decorative, but clean and well-built. "I'll let you look through the pantry and make a list of anything you need," Clayton said as they returned to the kitchen. "I can pick things up next time I go to town." Josie began opening cupboards and examining the pantry, mentally cataloging what was available and what was missing. "Do you have any favorite dishes, Mr. Evans?" she asked. Clayton thought for a moment. "My mother used to make a beef stew that I was partial to, and I wouldn't say no to fresh bread." "I can certainly manage that," Josie said with a smile. "Would you like me to start dinner now?" "That would be fine," Clayton said. "I have some chores to finish up. I'll be back in a couple of hours." As he walked out, Josie tied on an apron she found hanging by the stove and got to work. She found flour, lard, salt, and yeast for bread, and enough vegetables and beef to make a decent stew. As she worked, she felt a sense of purpose returning to her, a feeling she hadn't experienced since before her brother's death. By the time Clayton returned, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of baking bread and simmering stew. He paused in the doorway, an expression of appreciation crossing his weathered face. "Smells like heaven," he said, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "I haven't smelled home cooking like this since I left Tennessee." "Is that where you're from?" Josie asked as she stirred the stew. "I thought I detected a southern accent." "Born and raised," Clayton confirmed, washing his hands at the pump sink. "Left after the war, needed a fresh start. He didn't specify which side he'd fought on, and Josie didn't ask. The war had ended 13 years ago, but its wounds still ran deep across the country. "I'm from Missouri," Josie offered. "My brother James and I came west after our parents died. He heard there was good money in the mines here." "There can be," Clayton acknowledged, sitting at the table. "But it's dangerous work, and for every man who strikes it rich, 100 break their backs for nothing." Josie nodded, slicing the fresh bread. "James was one of the unlucky ones. A tunnel collapsed. They didn't even recover his body." Her voice caught on the last words. Clayton was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Losing family is hard. I lost my brother in the war, different circumstances, but the same emptiness afterward." Josie served the stew and bread, then sat across from Clayton. "What made you choose ranching?" she asked, wanting to move away from painful memories. "I've always preferred open spaces to towns," he said. "And I like working with animals. They're honest in a way people often aren't." He took a bite of the stew and closed his eyes briefly. "Miss O'Malley, this is excellent." "Thank you," she said, pleased by his reaction. "And please call me Josie. Miss O'Malley makes me feel like a school teacher." "Josie, then," he agreed. "And I'm Clayton to my friends, or Clay if you prefer." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the simple comfort of good food creating a sense of ease between them. After dinner, Clayton insisted on helping with the dishes, despite Josie's protests that it was her job. "My mother raised me to clean up after myself," he said firmly, rolling up his sleeves. "I won't have you thinking I expect to be waited on hand and foot." As they worked side by side, Josie stealing glances at Clayton's profile, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the kitchen stove. It had been a long time since anyone had treated her with such simple respect, as a person of value rather than an object of pity or disgust. That night, in her small cabin with the quilt pulled up to her chin, Josie allowed herself to acknowledge a dangerous truth. She was already developing feelings for Clayton Evans. It was foolish, she knew. He had helped her out of kindness, given her a job out of necessity. A man like him, handsome, established, kind, could have his pick of women, not an impoverished, overweight spinster with nothing to her name. But as she drifted off to sleep, the memory of his smile when he tasted her cooking lingered, a small flame of hope she couldn't quite extinguish. The days fell into a pattern. Josie rose early to prepare breakfast for Clayton before he went out to tend to the cattle and other ranch work. She spent her mornings cleaning the main house and preparing lunch, her afternoons baking and starting dinner preparations, with time in between to tend a small kitchen garden she had started near her cabin. Clayton was an easy man to cook for, appreciative of her efforts, but never demanding. He treated her with unfailing courtesy, always thanking her for meals, occasionally bringing her wildflowers he found while out riding the range, and making sure she had everything she needed. 2 weeks after her arrival, Clayton announced over breakfast that he would be going into town the next day. "Is there anything you need?" he asked. Josie handed him the list she had prepared: baking supplies, spices, coffee, and a few personal items. "Would it be possible for me to come with you?" she asked hesitantly. "I'd like to attend church if that's all right." "Of course," Clayton said. "I usually attend the morning service myself." The next morning, Josie dressed in her best clothes, which wasn't saying much, as she had only the clothes she'd worn to Eldorado Canyon and what Mrs. Peterson had given her. None fit her well, but she did her best to look presentable. The trip to town was pleasant, with Clayton pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the area. As they approached Eldorado Canyon, however, Josie felt her anxiety rising. The last time she had been in town, she had been at her lowest point. Would people remember her as the woman who ate scraps behind the saloon? Clayton seemed to sense her nervousness. "People in town know you're working for me now," he said. "Mrs. Peterson made sure of that. You've nothing to be ashamed of." The church service was well attended, with most of the town's respectable citizens present. Josie felt eyes on her as she walked in with Clayton, heard the whispers. But when several women approached her after the service, their welcome seemed genuine. "Mrs. Peterson told us how well you're doing," one woman said, introducing herself as Mrs. Taylor, the doctor's wife. "It's so nice to see you looking healthy." Josie thanked her, touched by the kindness but still uncomfortable with the attention. Clayton stayed by her side, his steady presence a comfort. After church, they visited the general store to purchase supplies. The storekeeper, a balding man named Johnson, greeted Clayton warmly and Josie with polite curiosity. "This is Miss O'Malley," Clayton said. "She's cooking for me out at the ranch now." "Lucky man," Johnson said with a smile. "Mrs. Peterson says Miss O'Malley is quite the cook." As Josie selected items from her list, she overheard two women whispering nearby. "That's the fat woman who was eating from the garbage behind the saloon," one said in a hushed voice. "Can you imagine? Clay Evans could have any woman in town and he hires her." "Maybe he likes his women substantial," the other replied with a laugh. "More to hold on to." Josie's cheeks burned with shame. She kept her head down, focusing on selecting the right kind of flour, pretending she hadn't heard. Suddenly Clayton was beside her, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by the gossiping women. "Did you find everything you need, Josie? The coffee you make is the best I've had in years. Whatever brand you're using, get extra." The women fell silent, their faces flushed at being overheard. Clayton gave them a cool nod as he guided Josie to another section of the store, his hand light on her elbow. "Don't let them bother you," he said quietly. "Small minds in a small town." Josie blinked back tears. "Thank you," she whispered. They finished their shopping and loaded the supplies into the wagon. As they prepared to leave town, Clayton surprised her by stopping in front of a dress shop. "One more stop," he said, helping her down from the wagon. "You need some new clothes." "Clayton, I can't afford," Josie began, but he cut her off. "Consider it an advance on your wages," he said firmly. "You need at least 2 decent dresses for work and something for Sundays." Inside the shop, the dressmaker, a plump, cheerful woman named Mrs. Garcia, greeted them warmly. "Clay Evans, what brings you to my humble establishment? Not looking for a dress for yourself, I hope," she teased. "Miss O'Malley needs some new clothes," Clayton said. "Work dresses and something for church." Mrs. Garcia assessed Josie with a professional eye. "I have a few ready-made dresses that could be altered to fit," she said. "Or I could make something custom, but that would take time." "Both," Clayton decided. "Alter what you have for immediate use and make her a proper Sunday dress." Josie was measured and fitted, her cheeks burning with embarrassment at having her size so openly discussed. But Mrs. Garcia was matter-of-fact and kind, treating Josie's body as a simple challenge of tailoring rather than something to be ashamed of. "You have a lovely figure, Mrs. Garcia said as she pinned a blue calico dress. "Full, yes, but well-proportioned. This color brings out your eyes." Clayton, who had been studying a display of hat ribbons with feigned interest, glanced over at this comment. His eyes met Josie's in the mirror, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "Blue suits you," he said simply, then returned his attention to the ribbons. They left the shop with 2 altered dresses that would be ready the next day, and measurements taken for a proper Sunday dress to be made in the coming weeks. On the ride back to the ranch, Josie was quiet, overwhelmed by the day's events. Clayton seemed to understand her need for silence. focusing on driving the wagon and only occasionally pointing out a hawk soaring overhead or a particularly beautiful view. Back at the ranch, as they unloaded the supplies, Clayton finally spoke. "I hope today wasn't too difficult for you." Josie paused, a sack of flour in her arms. "It was mixed," she admitted. "Those women in the store." "Ignore them," Clayton said firmly. "They don't know you, they don't know what you've been through." "They know I was eating garbage," Josie said, her voice small. "They know what I look like." Clayton set down the box he was carrying and turned to face her directly. "Josie, look at me." When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, "Hunger is nothing to be ashamed of, and as for your size, it's just a body. It doesn't tell me anything about who you are inside." Josie blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "Thank you for the dresses," she said finally. "I'll pay you back, I promise." "Take your time," Clayton said with a small smile. "I'm not going anywhere." That night, Josie lay awake longer than usual, replaying the day in her mind. The cruel whispers in the store had hurt, yes, but they were overshadowed by Clayton's quiet defense, Mrs. Garcia's matter-of-fact kindness, and the memory of Clayton's eyes meeting hers in the mirror, his simple words, "Blue suits you." It had been years since a man had looked at her with anything but pity or disgust. Was it possible that Clayton might see beyond her size to the woman beneath? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Over the next few weeks, Josie settled more deeply into life at the ranch. With her new dresses, she felt more confident moving about the kitchen and grounds. She expanded the vegetable garden, started a small herb patch, and even began keeping chickens for fresh eggs. Clayton continued to treat her with respect and growing warmth. Their evening meals became longer affairs as they lingered at the table, talking about their days, their pasts, their thoughts on everything from politics to literature. Clayton, it turned out, was an avid reader, and he began lending Josie books from his collection. One evening in late June, after a particularly satisfying dinner of roast chicken and apple pie, Clayton pushed back from the table with a contented sigh. "Josie, you've transformed this place. I don't know how I managed before you came." "Poorly, judging by the state of the pantry when I arrived," she teased, comfortable enough now to joke with him. Clayton laughed, a deep, pleasant sound that warmed her. "I'll have you know I survived quite well on my own." "Surviving isn't the same as living," Josie said, then blushed at how forward that sounded. Clayton's expression turned thoughtful. "No, it isn't," he agreed. He stood and went to a cabinet, returning with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "Would you join me on the porch? It's a fine evening, and I think we deserve a moment to enjoy it." The summer twilight was indeed beautiful, with the last rays of the setting sun painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. They sat in chairs on the porch, sipping whiskey and watching night fall over the ranch. Fireflies began to blink in the gathering darkness, and the first stars appeared overhead. "Tell me about your brother," Clayton said after a comfortable silence. "If you don't mind speaking of him." Josie swirled the amber liquid in her glass. "James was 4 years older than me. He practically raised me after our parents died from influenza when I was 12. He worked so hard to keep us together, to keep a roof over our heads." She smiled at the memory. "He was always dreaming of a better life for us. When he heard about the silver strikes in Nevada, he was convinced it was our chance." "And you followed him west," Clayton said softly. "I would have followed him anywhere," Josie admitted. "He was all the family I had left when he died." She took a shaky breath. "I didn't know what to do. I had some money saved, but not much. I took in washing, tried to find work as a cook, but—" "But what?" Clayton prompted when she fell silent. Josie gestured at herself. "Look at me, Clayton. I've always been large, even as a girl. But after James died, I couldn't stop eating. It was the only comfort I had. What little money I earned went to food, then the money ran out. She stared into her whiskey. You know the rest. Clayton was quiet for a long moment. My brother Charlie was 2 years younger than me, he finally said. Wild as they come, always laughing, always in trouble, but he had a good heart. His voice grew distant. He died at Gettysburg. I was there, but I couldn't save him. You fought for the Union? Josie asked. Clayton nodded. Our family didn't own slaves, never believed in it. Charlie and I both enlisted as soon as we could. He took a long drink. After he died, I couldn't go back to Tennessee, too many memories. So I drifted west, worked as a cowhand, saved up, and eventually bought this place 5 years ago. It's a beautiful ranch, Josie said softly. It is, Clayton agreed, but it's been a lonely one. His eyes met hers in the gathering darkness, until recently. Josie's heart began to beat faster. Clayton, you don't have to say anything, he said quickly. I just want you to know that having you here, it's made this place feel like a home again. They sat in silence after that, watching the stars emerge, each lost in thought. When Josie finally stood to return to her cabin, Clayton walked her to the door. Good night, Josie, he said, his voice soft in the darkness. Good night, Clayton. She hesitated, then added, Thank you for sharing about your brother, for understanding. He nodded, his face half in shadow. For a moment she thought he might say something more, might reach for her hand. But he simply touched the brim of an imaginary hat and turned back toward the main house. Josie closed the door behind her, her heart full of emotions she couldn't quite name. Hope, fear, longing all mingled together in a confusing tangle. Was it possible that Clayton Evans, with his kind eyes and gentle manner, might see her as more than just his cook? More than just a charity case he had rescued from behind a saloon? The thought seemed too wonderful to be true. And yet, the way he had looked at her tonight, the warmth in his voice when he said the ranch, had felt like a home again. Josie allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to belong here permanently, not as an employee but as something more. The summer progressed, hot and dry, with occasional thunderstorms that brought welcome rain. Josie's garden flourished under her care, providing fresh vegetables for their meals. She preserved fruits and vegetables for the winter, made jams from wild berries Clayton brought her, and continued to experiment with new recipes to please him. Their evening conversations on the porch became a ritual, a time both looked forward to. Sometimes they talked about serious matters, their lost families, their hopes and fears. Other times they shared lighter moments, laughing over books they'd both read or stories from their childhoods. Josie knew she was falling in love with Clayton. She tried to fight it, to remind herself that she was his employee, that a man like him could never return such feelings for a woman like her. But each day, as she watched him work with the cattle, repair fences, or simply sit at the kitchen table reading his newspaper, her heart grew fuller with feelings she couldn't suppress. Clayton, for his part, became more attentive as the weeks passed. He brought her wildflowers, complimented her cooking with specific observations rather than general praise, and found reasons to be near the house during the day. Sometimes, she would look up from her work to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. In August, Clayton announced that he needed to drive some cattle to Carson City for sale. I'll be gone for about 2 weeks, he told Josie over breakfast. Will you be all right here alone? Of course, Josie assured him, though the thought of being without him for so long made her heart sink. I have plenty to keep me busy with the garden and preserving. Clayton nodded, looking relieved. I've hired a local boy, Tommy Wilson, to check on you every few days. He's only 15, but he's reliable. If you need anything, he can ride into town for you. I'll be fine, Josie repeated. Don't worry about me. The morning Clayton left, Josie stood in the yard watching as he rode away with his small herd of cattle. He turned in the saddle to wave, and she raised her hand in return, fighting the ridiculous urge to run after him and beg him not to go. The first few days of his absence were busy enough that Josie didn't have much time to dwell on her loneliness. She cleaned the main house thoroughly, put up peaches, and baked enough bread and cookies to last a month. Tommy Wilson, a gangly boy with freckles and a shy smile, came by as promised every few days. He chopped wood for her, checked the chicken coop for predators, and generally made himself useful. "Mr. Evans said to make sure you had everything you needed, madam," he explained earnestly. He was real specific about it. The thought warmed Josie, even as she missed Clayton more with each passing day. At night, in her small cabin, she found herself imagining his return, fantasizing about him sweeping her into his arms and declaring feelings that matched her own. Such daydreams were foolish, she knew, but they helped pass the lonely evenings. 10 days after Clayton's departure, Josie was in the garden harvesting tomatoes when she heard a wagon approaching. Shading her eyes against the sun, she looked up to see not Clayton but 3 men she didn't recognize. Something about the way they surveyed the property made her uneasy. She stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she called, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The men exchanged glances. The oldest, a grizzled man with a scar across his cheek, spoke. "Looking for Evans. He around?" "Mr. Evans is away on business," Josie replied. "He's expected back next week. I can give him a message if you'd like." The men conferred in low voices, then the scarred man nodded. "We'll come back," he said, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. They turned the wagon and headed back down the road. Uneasy, Josie went inside and locked the door, something she rarely did during the day. There had been something menacing about those men, something that left her feeling vulnerable and exposed. That night, she had trouble sleeping, starting at every sound. Just after midnight, she heard hoofbeats approaching the ranch. Fear gripped her had the men returned. But then she heard a familiar voice calling her name. Grabbing her shawl, Josie hurried outside. Clayton dismounted from his horse, looking tired but relieved to see her. "You're all right," he said, striding toward her. "Thank God." "Of course I'm all right," Josie said, confused. "Why wouldn't I be? But you're back early. Is everything okay?" Clayton ran a hand through his hair, which was dusty from the trail. "I ran into Bob Taylor in Carson City. He told me the McGrath brothers were asking about my ranch, saying I had something that belonged to them. They have a reputation for taking what they want, and I was worried they might come here while I was gone." 3 men did come by today, Josie admitted. "One had a scar on his face. They asked for you and I told them you were away. They said they'd come back." Clayton's face hardened. "That was them. The scarred one is Silas McGrath. His brothers aren't much better." He put his hands on her shoulders, looking into her eyes. "Did they threaten you, say anything inappropriate?" "No," Josie said, touched by his concern. "They just looked around and left. What do they want from you?" Clayton sighed, dropping his hands. "It's a long story. Let's go inside and I'll explain." In the main house, Josie made coffee while Clayton washed up. When they were seated at the kitchen table, steaming cups before them, he began his explanation. 5 years ago, when I bought this ranch, I purchased it from a man named Henderson. The McGrath brothers had wanted it for themselves, but Henderson refused to sell to them because of their reputation. When I showed up with cash in hand, Henderson sold to me instead." Clayton took a sip of his coffee. "The McGraths have held a grudge ever since. They own the neighboring property to the east and have been trying to expand their holdings. Now, there's a rumor of a railroad spur coming through this area, which would make the land even more valuable." "So they want to force you to sell?" Josie asked, Clayton nodded grimly. They've tried before cutting my fences, rustling a few head of cattle, nothing I couldn't handle, but if they're coming around openly now asking for me. He trailed off, looking worried. I don't like the idea of them finding you here alone. I can take care of myself, Josie said, though her voice lacked conviction. Clayton reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture so unexpected that Josie nearly gasped. I know you can, he said earnestly. You're one of the strongest people I know, Josie. But the McGraths are dangerous men. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me. His hand was warm around hers, calloused from ranch work but gentle in its touch. Josie looked down at their joined hands, then back up at Clayton's face. The concern in his eyes made her breath catch. What do you want to do? She asked softly. Clayton sighed. I need to finish the cattle drive. I left most of the herd with a friend outside Carson City. The sale is arranged for the day after tomorrow. He thought for a moment. Would you consider staying in town until I return? Mrs. Peterson would take you in, I'm sure. Josie shook her head. This is my home too, Clayton. I won't be driven away by threats. Besides, if I leave, who will look after the chickens, the garden? All the preserves I've put up. A smile tugged at the corner of Clayton's mouth. Always practical, he murmured. All right, but I'm not comfortable leaving you here alone again. I'll ask Tommy to stay on the property until I return. He can sleep in the barn. And I'll let Sheriff Mills know about the McGrath's visit. Josie nodded, reluctantly withdrawing her hand from his. That sounds reasonable. When will you go back? Tomorrow morning, early, Clayton said. I'll finish the sale and be back within 5 days at the most. He hesitated, then added, I meant what I said, Josie. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you. There was something in his voice, something beyond the concern of an employer for a valued employee. Josie felt her heart begin to race. I'll be careful, she promised, and I'll be here when you return. They finished their coffee in a silence charged with unspoken emotions. When they finally said good night, both lingering at the door as if reluctant to part, Josie returned to her cabin with her mind whirling. The way Clayton had looked at her, the way he had held her hand. Could it be possible that he felt something for her beyond friendship? The thought kept her awake long into the night, hope warring with doubt in her heart. Clayton left at dawn the next morning, after giving Tommy detailed instructions about watching over the ranch and Josie. The boy nodded solemnly, clearly taking his responsibility seriously. I'll take good care of everything, Mr. Evans, he promised. My pa gave me his shotgun to bring just in case. Clayton clapped the boy on the shoulder. Good lad. But remember, if those men come back, don't try to be a hero. Ride for the sheriff immediately. Before mounting his horse, Clayton pulled Josie aside. Stay close to the house, he said in a low voice. Keep the doors locked at night. I've left my revolver in the top drawer of my desk if you need it. I'll be fine, Josie assured him. Tommy's here and the McGraths probably won't come back anyway. Clayton's eyes searched her face as if memorizing her features. 5 days, he said. I'll be back in 5 days or less. Then, to Josie's complete shock, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. Take care of yourself, Josie, he murmured, then mounted his horse and rode away before she could respond. Josie stood in the yard, her hand pressed to her cheek where his lips had touched, watching until he disappeared from view. Tommy pretended not to notice, busying himself with chopping wood, but Josie caught him glancing at her with curious eyes. The next few days passed uneventfully. Josie kept busy with her usual tasks, and Tommy proved to be good company, eager to help and full of stories about life in town. At night, he slept in the barn as arranged, with Clayton's old dog Blue keeping him company. On the 4th day after Clayton's departure, Josie was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Her heart leapt. Was Clayton back early? But when she went to the window, her hopes fell. It was the McGrath brothers again, this time accompanied by two more men she didn't recognize. "Tommy," she called through the open window to where the boy was mending a chicken coop. "Riders coming." Tommy looked up, saw the approaching men, and immediately dropped his tools. "I'll get the shotgun," he said, running toward the barn. Josie quickly moved to Clayton's study and retrieved the revolver from the desk drawer. She had never fired a gun before, but had watched her brother handle firearms enough to understand the basics. She tucked it into the pocket of her apron and returned to the kitchen just as the men dismounted in the yard. Through the window, she saw Tommy emerge from the barn, shotgun in hand. He looked terribly young and small, facing 5 grown men, but his stance was determined. "Mr. Evans ain't here," she heard him call. "He left word you're not welcome on his property." Silas McGrath, the scarred man, laughed. "Well, ain't you a fierce little rooster? Put down that scattergun before you hurt yourself, boy." "I know how to use it," Tommy replied, his voice only wavering slightly. "My pa taught me. Now state your business and be on your way." Josie's heart swelled with pride for the boy's courage, even as fear knotted her stomach. She moved to the front door, opening it but remaining in the doorway, the revolver still hidden in her pocket. "Gentlemen," she called, drawing their attention. "As the boy said, Mr. Evans is away on business. If you have legitimate matters to discuss with him, I suggest you return next week." Silas McGrath turned his cold eyes on her, taking in her substantial figure with a dismissive glance. "And who might you be?" "Evans's woman," the question, delivered with a sneer, made Josie's cheeks flush. "I'm the housekeeper," she replied stiffly. "And you're trespassing." McGrath's laugh was ugly. "Housekeeper, is it? Evans always did have peculiar tastes." He stepped closer, and Josie's hand closed around the revolver in her pocket. "Listen here, woman. Evans has something we want, namely this ranch. We're willing to pay for it, but one way or another we're going to have it. You tell him that when he returns." "I'll pass along your message," Josie said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Now please leave." McGrath studied her for a moment, then spat on the ground. "We'll go for now. But we'll be back, and next time, Evans better be here to talk business." He turned to Tommy, who still held the shotgun trained on the group. "You got guts, boy. Better hope you don't need them spilled on the ground." The men mounted their horses and rode away, but not before one of them fired a shot into the air, causing Tommy to flinch and Josie to gasp. When they were out of sight, Tommy lowered the shotgun, his young face pale. "They're bad men," he said simply. "Yes, they are," Josie agreed, her hand still clutching the revolver in her pocket. "Tommy, I want you to ride into town and tell Sheriff Mills what happened. Tell him the McGraths threatened us and fired a shot." Tommy nodded, looking relieved to have a clear course of action. "What about you, Miss Josie? Will you be all right alone?" "I'll be fine," she assured him, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. "The McGraths have made their point for today. They won't be back until they've given Mr. Evans time to return. Now go quickly." As Tommy saddled his horse and rode toward town, Josie returned to the house, locking the door behind her. She placed the revolver on the kitchen table within easy reach and tried to return to her bread making, but her hands were shaking too badly to work the dough properly. Instead, she sat at the table, the gun before her, and tried to calm her racing thoughts. The McGraths clearly meant business. What if they returned before Clayton came back? What if they decided not to wait, to take what they wanted by force? And then there was McGrath's sneering question. "Evans's woman." The contempt in his voice had cut deeply, reinforcing all of Josie's insecurities about her appearance. Clayton had kissed her cheek before leaving, had held her hand and spoken words that hinted at deeper feelings. But was she fooling herself? Could a man like Clayton Evans truly care for a woman like her? The sound of hoofbeats hours later made her snatch up the revolver again, but it was only Tommy returning with Sheriff Mills, a grizzled older man with a star pinned to his vest and a Colt revolver on his hip. "Miss O'Malley," the sheriff greeted her as she opened the door. "Tommy here tells me the McGrath boys paid you a visit." "Yes, Sheriff," Josie confirmed, inviting the men inside and setting the revolver aside. "5 of them. They said they want to buy Mr. Evans's ranch and implied they would take it by force if necessary." Sheriff Mills sighed, removing his hat. "Those McGraths have been causing trouble since they moved into the territory 3 years ago. I've had my eye on them, but they're careful to stay just this side of the law." He accepted the cup of coffee Josie offered. "Where's Clayton now?" "Finishing a cattle sale in Carson City," Josie explained. "He should be back tomorrow or the next day at the latest." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "I can't spare a deputy to stay out here, but I'll ride by regularly until Clayton returns. In the meantime," he glanced at Tommy. "The boy says he's staying in the barn. Might be better if he sleeps in the house tonight." Josie agreed, and after the sheriff left, she prepared a pallet for Tommy in the sitting room. They ate a quiet dinner, both jumpy at every sound from outside. That night, Josie barely slept, listening for hoofbeats or the creak of footsteps on the porch. Morning came without incident, and Josie allowed herself to hope that Clayton would return by nightfall. Tommy went about his chores, the shotgun never far from reach, while Josie tried to focus on her normal tasks: feeding the chickens, weeding the garden, preparing meals. By late afternoon, there was still no sign of Clayton. Josie was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard Tommy shout. Running to the window, she saw riders approaching, at least a dozen men with Silas McGrath in the lead. "Get inside, Tommy," she called, but the boy stood his ground in the yard, shotgun raised. Josie grabbed the revolver and ran outside, her heart pounding. "Tommy, please come inside." The boy glanced at her but shook his head. "Mr. Evans trusted me to protect the place," he said stubbornly. The McGrath party halted a few yards away. Silas McGrath looked them over, a large woman and a skinny boy, both armed but clearly terrified. "Where's Evans?" he demanded. "Not here," Josie replied, the revolver steady in her hand despite her fear. "Sheriff Mills knows you threatened us yesterday. He'll be checking on us." McGrath laughed. "Mills is busy with a brawl in town. Funny how that happened just when we decided to pay another visit." He dismounted, followed by his brothers and the other men. "We're tired of waiting, woman. Evans had his chance to sell peacefully." "This property isn't for sale," Josie said firmly, "and Mr. Evans will be back any moment." "I doubt that," one of the other McGraths said with a nasty smile. "Roads can be dangerous. All sorts of accidents happen to lone travelers." Josie felt a cold fear grip her heart. "What have you done?" "Nothing yet," Silas McGrath said, "but we're about to burn this ranch to the ground if Evans doesn't sign it over to us." "Maybe we'll start with that pathetic garden you've been tending." One of the men dismounted and approached the garden with a lit torch. Without thinking, Josie raised the revolver and fired. The shot went wild, but the man with the torch jumped back in surprise. "The woman's got spirit," McGrath observed. "Take the gun from her." 2 men started toward Josie. Tommy fired the shotgun into the air, momentarily halting their advance. "Stay back," he yelled, his voice cracking. The standoff might have escalated further if not for the sound of galloping hooves approaching fast from the road. Everyone turned to see a rider racing toward them, rifle in hand. "Clayton," Josie whispered, relief flooding through her. Clayton Evans pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the yard, his rifle aimed squarely at Silas McGrath. "Get off my land," he said, his voice cold with fury. Now, McGrath sneered. There's more of us than you, Evans. That may be, Clayton agreed, but you'll be the first to die, Silas. I guarantee it. His eyes flicked to Josie and Tommy. Are you both all right? We're fine, Josie assured him, though her voice shook. Good. Clayton's gaze returned to McGrath. I won't tell you again. Get off my property. For a tense moment, no one moved, then McGrath spat on the ground. This isn't over, Evans. Not by a long shot. Oh, I think it is, came another voice, and Sheriff Mills rode into the yard, followed by 4 armed deputies. McGrath, you and your boys are under arrest for trespassing and threatening these good people. McGrath's face contorted with rage, but surrounded by deputies with rifles. He and his men had little choice but to surrender. As the sheriff's posse disarmed and rounded up the McGraths and their associates, Clayton dismounted and hurried to Josie's side. Are you sure you're all right? He asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. When I heard in town about the McGraths causing trouble at my ranch. We're fine, Josie repeated, suddenly exhausted now that the danger had passed. The revolver fell from her nerveless fingers and Clayton caught it, setting it aside before taking her hands in his. You're shaking, he observed quietly. It's been a long day, Josie admitted with a weak smile. Tommy approached, still clutching the shotgun. I did my best to protect Miss Josie, Mr. Evans, he said earnestly. Clayton squeezed the boy's shoulder. You did well, Tommy. Your father will be proud. Sheriff Mills approached after ensuring his deputies had the situation under control. Clayton, good timing. Your housekeeper and this young man were holding their own, but it could have gotten ugly. I'll be pressing charges, Clayton said firmly. Trespassing, threats, attempted arson, whatever will keep them locked up the longest. The sheriff nodded. Between your testimony and Miss O'Malley's, we should be able to put them away for a good while. I've suspected they were behind several other incidents in the territory. This might give us the leverage we need to investigate further. After the sheriff and his deputies departed with their prisoners, Clayton turned to Tommy. You should head home, son. Your parents will be worried. Tell them what happened, and that I said you're the bravest young man I know. Tommy beamed at the praise, reluctantly handing over the shotgun before mounting his horse. Will you be needing me tomorrow, Mr. Evans? Take a few days off, Clayton told him. You've earned it. When they were alone, Clayton led Josie to the porch and gently pressed her into a chair. You're still shaking, he said, crouching before her. Let me get you some water. I'm just relieved you're back, Josie said, catching his hand before he could rise. One of the McGraths implied they might have done something to you on the road. Clayton's expression darkened. They tried. Set an ambush about 5 miles out, but I spotted them and took a different route. That's why I was delayed. His face softened as he looked at her. I was worried sick about you, Josie. The whole way back, all I could think about was getting to you before they did. His words warmed her heart, chasing away some of the lingering fear. I'm just glad you're safe, she said. And that Tommy wasn't hurt. That boy has more courage than sense. He reminds me of my brother at that age, Clayton said with a small smile. He still held her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. Josie, when I rode up and saw you standing there facing down those men with nothing but my old revolver, I've never been so scared or so proud in all my life. Josie blushed, looking down at their joined hands. I didn't know what else to do. They were going to burn the garden and I just reacted. You protected our home, Clayton said softly, emphasizing the word our in a way that made Josie's heart skip. This place hasn't felt like just my ranch for some time now. It's become our home, yours and mine. Josie raised her eyes to his, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Clayton, let me finish, he said, his voice gentle but determined. I've been trying to find the right moment, the right words. Today made me realize there might never be a perfect time, and I can't risk waiting any longer." He took a deep breath. "Josie O'Malley, I love you. I think I started falling in love with you that first day behind the saloon when you refused my help out of pride despite your hunger." Tears filled Josie's eyes. "You can't mean that," she whispered. "Look at me, Clayton. I'm not what men want." Clayton reached up to touch her cheek, wiping away a tear with his thumb. "You're exactly what this man wants," he said firmly. "Your kindness, your strength, your resilience, everything about you calls to me. And yes, your body too. You're beautiful to me, Josie. Every inch of you." A sob escaped her, half joy and half disbelief. "I love you too," she admitted. "I have for so long, but I never dreamed you could feel the same." Clayton rose slightly, still kneeling but now at eye level with her. "I do feel the same," he assured her. "More than I can say." Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but when Josie responded, it deepened into something more passionate, years of loneliness and longing pouring into this first true connection. When they finally parted, both breathless, Clayton rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Be my wife, my partner. Help me make this ranch everything it could be." "Yes," Josie answered without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you, Clayton Evans." He kissed her again, and in that moment, all the hardships she had endured, the loss of her brother, the months of poverty and humiliation, even the day's terror seemed worth it, for they had led her here, to this man, to this love, to this second chance at happiness. Clayton and Josie were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Eldorado Canyon. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, with Tommy Wilson serving proudly as Clayton's best man and Mrs. Peterson, who had cried with joy upon hearing the news, standing up for Josie. Mrs. Garcia had outdone herself with Josie's wedding dress, a creation of ivory satin that flattered her full figure and made her feel beautiful for the first time in years. When Clayton saw her walking down the aisle, the love in his eyes banished any remaining doubts she might have harbored about his feelings. The town's response to their marriage was mixed. Some, like Mrs. Peterson and Dr. Taylor's wife, were genuinely happy for them. Others whispered behind their hands about the odd pairing, the handsome rancher and the obese woman he had found eating scraps behind a saloon. But Clayton and Josie paid little attention to gossip, too absorbed in their newfound happiness to care what others thought. Their wedding night was a revelation for Josie, who had never known a man's touch. Clayton was gentle and patient, showing her that her body, which had been a source of shame for so long, could also be a source of pleasure, both hers and his. In his arms, she felt beautiful, desired, cherished. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered afterward, lying beside him in what was now their shared bedroom in the main house. "This is just the beginning," Clayton promised, pulling her close. "We have a lifetime ahead of us." Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Josie continued to cook and tend the garden, but now as the mistress of the house rather than the housekeeper. Clayton worked alongside his newly hired ranch hands, expanding the herd and improving the property. Tommy Wilson, now 16, became Clayton's unofficial apprentice, spending weekends at the ranch learning the cattle business. The McGrath brothers were convicted of multiple crimes and sentenced to several years in the territorial prison. With their absence, peace returned to the region, and Clayton and Josie could focus on building their future together. In the spring following their wedding, Josie discovered she was expecting a child. Clayton's joy at the news was boundless. He immediately began building a cradle, planning nursery space in their home, and generally fussing over Josie to an extent that both touched and amused her. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him one evening when he insisted on carrying a basket of laundry that she was perfectly capable of managing. "Humor me," he replied with a grin. "I've waited my whole life to be a father. I want to take care of both of you." Their son, James Charles Evans, named for both their lost brothers, was born on a crisp autumn day in 1879. He had Clayton's dark hair and Josie's blue eyes, and from his first breath, he was the center of their world. "He's perfect," Clayton whispered, cradling his newborn son with tears in his eyes. "Just like his mother." Josie, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband with their child and felt her heart might burst with happiness. The journey that had brought her to this moment, the loss, the hunger, the humiliation of eating scraps behind a saloon seemed distant now, like a story that had happened to someone else. Yet she knew she would never forget that day when Clayton Evans had found her at her lowest point and seen not an object of pity, but a person worthy of dignity and respect. That moment of kindness had changed the course of her life, leading her to a love and happiness she had never dared to imagine. As the years passed, the Evans ranch prospered. Clayton's cattle business expanded, and Josie's garden grew into a small but profitable venture selling preserves and vegetables in town. James grew into a strong, kind-hearted boy with his father's love for the land and his mother's compassion. 2 years after James's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Rose, and 3 years later, another son they named William. Their family was complete, their home filled with love and laughter. Josie's relationship with her body changed over the years. She remained a large woman, but the regular work of ranch life and motherhood gave her strength and energy she had lacked during her months of poverty. More importantly, Clayton's unwavering love and desire for her helped her see herself through his eyes not as the fat woman whispered about in town, but as a beautiful, desirable woman worthy of love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Clayton surprised Josie with a special dinner in town, at the very saloon where he had first brought her inside and ordered 2 steaks. "You remember that day?" he asked as they sat at the same table in the private dining area, now much more elegantly appointed than it had been a decade earlier. "How could I forget?" Josie replied, reaching across the table to take his hand. "It was the day my life changed." Clayton squeezed her hand. "Mine too, though I didn't fully realize it then. I just knew I couldn't bear to see someone hungry when I had the means to help." "You gave me more than food," Josie said softly. "You gave me back my dignity, my hope, eventually my heart." Clayton's eyes, still as warm and kind as they had been on that first day, held hers. "Best decision I ever made, bringing you inside this saloon. Best decision I ever made letting you," Josie countered with a smile. Later that night, back at the ranch with their children sleeping soundly, Clayton held Josie close in their bed. 10 years, he murmured against her hair. "The happiest decade of my life." "Mine too," Josie agreed, nestling against him. "Though I suspect the next 10 will be even better." "And the 10 after that," Clayton added. "And after that, for as long as we have." Josie closed her eyes, savoring the moment, the feeling of being exactly where she belonged. From the depths of despair behind a saloon to the heights of happiness, in the arms of the man she loved, her journey had been unlikely, unexpected, but ultimately perfect in its own way. Outside their window, the Nevada sky was filled with stars, the same stars that had witnessed their first real conversation on the porch years ago. But now, instead of uncertainty and longing, there was only peace, contentment, and the deep, abiding love that had transformed 2 lonely souls into a family, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. In the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Josie whispered the words that still felt like a miracle after all these years. "I love you, Clayton Evans." And as he had countless times before, Clayton answered with the words that had healed her heart and soul. "I love you too, Josie Evans. More than I could ever say." In that moment, as in so many moments over their years together, Josie knew with absolute certainty that even the darkest chapters of her life had been worth enduring, for they had led her here, to this love, to this man who had truly seen her when she was invisible to everyone else. Sometimes, the most beautiful love stories begin in the most unlikely places, even behind a dusty saloon in a mining town, with two stakes and an act of simple human kindness.